Hello, this is CANDIA, RAQUEL, and you are at the Sensual Sessions Podcast, the place to explore sensing pleasure through your senses and moving in a way that is free from inhibition and full of self-expression. If you haven't already, please get these episodes delivered on your inbox weekly by subscribing on my website at my name, candiaraquel.com, which is www.candiaraquel.com. And today we have a very special guest. This is Anne Juren. She's a dance artist, an artistic researcher, a choreographer, a Feldenkrais method practitioner, and she works with somatic therapy. And she also intertwines this approach to her creative work. And I am very excited to have her here. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to ask you on your views on sensuality. How do you approach um, this this topic of enjoying the pleasure in the body, both in your work as a choreographer and in your somatic therapy work?
I mean, I've been just before we were talking, the two of us, just before the recording, I've been speaking about, for me, the use of the terminology that is very important for my work as a choreographer and also as a soma therapist, the sensuality, but also the sensoriality, the sensorial, which I'm using in my work often when I don't know people yet, more the sensorial self. I call it, there is a sensorial self. There is the self that somehow perform in the world, but we have many self anyway. But the sensorial self is something that is supposedly in different culture a bit more hidden, let's say, something that somehow doesn't express itself either so easily, but also in a way not so clearly, not so openly in some ways. And again, we speak about there are different culture towards that, of course. And so for me, it's very essential, the sensual and the sensorial. And even I will say as much as the difference between the erotic and the sexual is a very important zones, or a very important difference to take as well. So the sensual and the sensorial are really words, or let's say terminology, that are very important while working with the body, because the body is essential matter. It is moving, it moves itself also through senses. So we cannot extract the sensual self and the sensorial self outside of the body matter. This is too cruel almost to do so.
Yeah, definitely. I have never thought about it, but it's definitely cruel to pretend to extract the sensitivity aspect and the pleasure aspect of our being. And I can relate to this because I have a background in ballet dancing and in Graham technique. And I mean, being a ballet dancer is almost like being a martial artist or a military soldier, and even worse because you have to look pretty. At least the martial artist can scream, and at least the person in the military can make faces, but in ballet, I mean, I have had my toenail detached, and I was more worried about not staining the satin of my ponte shoes with blood because I didn't have money for new ones than what actually happened in the body. And I feel that this is just an expression of something that we are living in a society as a whole to to hide our physical sensitivity as if we were not a body and to repress our emotionality, all for the sake of production, all for the sake of achievement that I now realize how cruel it is, just as like an expectation, and especially for women, that we are not supposed to complain because otherwise we are so sensitive or emotional. And I am loving how you clarify the the word, the being a sensory being and also being a sensual being, because I feel it's I would say maybe emotionally safe approach to take away the expectation of pleasure when you are trying to get in touch with your body at the beginning, if you have never done any somatic work, and then you approach you want to approach sensuality, and there's the expectation of pleasure. But if you have been in pain or disconnected with your body, or you come from a religious country like mine, Mexico, where Catholicism says that the body is like something bad and pleasure is your straight ticket to hell, then
Yeah.
focusing on the sensitivity feels like less pressure, because something that I am sure is that pleasure should never be an obligation. The same as love. You cannot force love. And if there's the expectation to love or to be loved, then it ruins things. So I want to ask you about something that you mentioned earlier in our conversation, that is the imagination, and how these words and the expectation in regards to these terms shape the experience or the disposition. So it's different when one is like, okay, I am looking for finding more about my sensitivity, and it's quite different than the approach of I am gonna see what comes out in terms of sensual pleasure. So what would you say about imagination?
I mean, it's interesting that you put imagination with the notion of pleasure, because I think I wanted to also, it's interesting your example of the ballet dancer. In a sense, I feel like our sensorial self has been put in a place of disciplines to control it in a way, because the worst for society, in order to function, is to control the bodies, to control the mind, and to control imagination, and therefore to control also the pleasure, the zone of pleasure, the zones where one can have pleasure, when one cannot have them. So and we live for many years, many centuries in societies of control, of disciplines, where it's because it's easier to put many people together and control them in a way to order them, because to work with pleasure is something which is frightening, because it goes everywhere. The
Yes.
pleasure is not very clear. What it brings pleasure, it's something that it can be even bad pleasure is pleasure. The pleasure of the woman pleasure was such a big lack in our it didn't even existed for many years, and we know that there is a different the pleasure, woman pleasure on a sexual level, we'll say, like, if we it's extremely diffuse, it goes in many places, so it's very hard to control it. And I think in a society when one wants to control, of course, you kill imagination, you kill the body, you kill pleasure, and therefore you kill the senses, because the senses are actually a kind of almost like the tentacles that reach all those kind of fabulous fantasies and places where everything gets chaotic and a bit more obscure, because it goes everywhere. One cannot control our pleasure. A pleasure comes at once, and it goes in places that one can even imagine. So imagination, I will say, exists, but I will say the desire or the idea of the expanded imagination as the expanded sensuality, the expanded sensoriality, is something that it's an effort in certain society, again, because I'm coming from the West and I speak from this place, where those things, woman pleasure, the notion of pleasure, or it also, I mean, the body's pleasure has been controlled by certain religion, by certain way of thinking, by the economy and the idea of I say production. So serial of production, of course, because it takes too much time to have pleasure. It takes too much time to build other imagination. There's no time for it. It's boring. Doesn't bring anything. It doesn't create product. So those things doesn't goes into this kind of nowadays world. So it's yeah, I want to say that imagination, pleasure, and sensuality are intertwined, and they are expandable. But it's hard. It's harder and harder to find places when those ones can expand.
Yes, it's hard to find pleasure places when one can expand pleasure, imagination, sensitivity, and let those tentacles of experience expand to new places. And yes, definitely, like pleasure is uncontrollable. Like you feel it and you feel it, and it takes you to places that you were unaware of, and it has to do a lot with vitality, with our vital force. And then we see, for example, animals like my dog, that
Your dog that I can see, beautiful dog.
yeah, her name is Dynamite. She's very explosive.
Dynamite, yes.
Dynamite and uncontrollable.
Yeah.
Animals, even domestic animals have this unsuppressed connection to pleasure, to the wilderness, and most importantly to sensitivity. Like they are really living here now, which is something that we in our culture, in our Western culture, have I have made more diffuse because of this idea of time, that there's a past, a present, and a future. And the truth is that there is only now. The only thing that exists is now, but we need this linear idea in our and work through our imagination of this time frame idea for the sense of production. And then comes pleasure, and pleasure makes 10 hours feel like 1 second, and also pleasure turns 1 second like the glance, like when your eyes meet the eyes of your beloved, or like there are moments that become infinite when we are in touch with our sensory nature. So yes, it's definitely frightening because we cannot box it. And at the same time, when we are in our senses, in our full sensitivity, we are more attuned to what is really happening now, to the changing environment, to the weather, to the threats, to the dog, to the sounds, to the incoming information, and with the response of the environment. But it's frightening. So how do you create, both in your artistic work and in your therapeutic work, this space for our sensory self to be free?
I mean, the notion of freedom is another notion that I found it difficult to speak of, because it's very hard word, freedom. Pleasure, I almost prefer to speak about pleasure, because the aesthetic of it is so diffuse, and it goes so boom, and it can be, there is no morale in pleasure. And a bad pleasure is a pleasure as well, and a good pleasure is a pleasure as well. So freedom, I think it's as different. It's a very political term, I will say. So I don't look for freedom in a. I don't. Sometimes actually, it's first already to get contact with one body system is so. It has a potential of sensuality in it, like to get in contact, and it's so obscure. Or also the zone where my body system can actually get in contact with the body system, another body system that that I didn't know before, and vice versa. So I will say the first kind of work or the direction that is really about this moment of tangent. I call that the point of contact, where something can meet. There is a contact that it can take. I mean, I work with sessions, so there is people come back and come back. It can take many sessions to just establish a zone of contact, and also to understand the sensual self of a body entity is a complex. It's a complex thing because it's so obscure and so diffuse and so. So I will say, like, also what is very important when work with body and sensuality is to create a trust and create a lot of zone of supports. So for both systems, without support, there is no sensuality possible. Without clear and a zone of place of trust, there is no sensuality possible. There is no the senses they will shut down in some ways. They will not be present in the session. So, but where to create zone of supports? Because this is also very obscure. Every single entity, singular entity, are so special and so singular. Every system. When I say system, is the body. Every body need different zone of supports. Some people fell down, and if you give two, or they have different experience in life, simply. So it takes a lot of time, and this time is very. I will call it the sensual time, because it's a zone where you pay attention, you don't know, you look for. It's very diffuse. It doesn't, everything speaks at once. You have no idea what's going on. It's a language that no one talks before. You have no idea. And this no idea is very essential moment where actually you open your senses so much, and your attention to something that is very obscure. Then even with people you will not even like, because you have to open the senses to people you will not feel any kind of interest to speak with. I had in my practice people that I will think like, oh my God, I will never meet in my daily life, because it will not, it's of course it's part of life what I'm saying, but they will never become friends, I would say. But yet there is a senses that is there, nevertheless. And I found it extremely, this temporality of non-moral self, extremely powerful, to trespass this zone of discipline and control. Because it doesn't control me as much as it doesn't control the person. But yet we create some kind of language together. So it's a very creative place.
It's a very creative place. The space of trust for essential time. And before elaborating a bit on this, I want to say that, yeah, freedom and pleasure are too broad, and they have political implications, because indeed bad pleasure is also pleasure, and freedom can be also the freedom of an oligarch to do whatever they want without considering the other. So the same in regards to pleasure, like you can get pleasure out of of something that is not good for you and that is not good for another person. For example, um, let's say addiction, or something simpler as eating too many donuts too many days in a row. So
Exactly. Yeah.
so there can be um, life affirming pleasure and freedom for all, like when we go beyond the self and we leave ourselves within the context of the others, and not interfering with them, but deliberately not affecting them and not affecting ourselves. And I believe that what's key here is what you mentioned, that trust is a requirement to experience pleasure, and not only pleasure and sensuality, but sensitivity itself, because sometimes we are shut down, and it's good that we shut down and numb ourselves, because if we have experienced stuff that is too hard, so it's like a survival mechanism. But wanting to go beyond that and open again to sensing life, trust is important. And I believe not only trust in the practitioner, or trust in your beloved, or trust in your dance partner, but also trust in yourself. So like to reinforce the connection with what we are listening and how we decide upon what we are feeling in regards to ourselves, and create this real zone of support. That the word of support, immediately you said zone of support, and I started relaxing, because in a way it's like a zone of grounding, like a place where you can be, where you are like, I don't know, I get that, like a gravity connection, Mother Earth. And I also like that this zone of support includes, in a way, a no moral zone. And it reminded me of an important difference that psychoanalysis makes between moral and ethics. And it said that moral has to do with what other people think about you and what you're doing and what they are doing. And ethics is what you believe it's the right thing for you. So you can do horrible things without anyone noticing, but you do know what you're doing. So I also find like opening and believing to be in a zone of support that is that allows for your non-moral self to express, like to, for a moment, quiet the voices that are gonna say bad things or good things according to your behavior, and open to the chaotic and obscure experiences that come forth when we tap into our sensitivity. And my next question is how to deal with fear of the unknown that may arise from entering a realm that is unbound and undone and mysterious, like when you realize, like, wow, I didn't knew that my armpit was like a, a pleasure, a zone of pleasure, or I had never seen myself moving in this way. Like, wow, am I also this? How to not freak out with what comes out.
Well, that's very singular, I will say, but we are never alone. It's a never a lonely place to be. Sensuality is a very it moves between bodies always. So it's never your own self that's sensing only for yourself. So what I want to say, if something happened that freaks someone's mind, um, there is there is many self that can actually also interact and just say, okay, you can calm down, it's fine. But there is also people, I would say simply just ask someone, do you sense also the same in your armpit? That is amazing. I feel like I'm having an orgasm right now. Is that for you the same? And people will say, okay, no, it's funny you're speaking about that. For me, it's a different place and it's this place. And suddenly you have a see, that's where it's funny that we don't even talk about those things. And I mean, freak out in when one senses something very, very. It's a beautiful place to be. And often, I mean, most of the time, I mean, we are not alone sensing that, even though we think that we are. We think often that those places, and this is what I speak about, those expectations in the somatic world, I will say, like it feels that they are what my critique towards that is, it feels that it's just for the one individual, it's the for what the one self only. It's as if it's just for one person. So you go to classes and you feel something on yourself, and it's so specific and so singular. You think it's just for you, and yet it's not. More you sense, and more you're part of the world, basically, in some ways. So it's a very collective adventure. And in certain society, one will not share. You keep it for yourself, and then you take it as a product of the good being. It's for yourself, and you keep it, and you can do it again and again for many times for you. And I found it pity, because actually it's such a beautiful place to be, and it's a collective place. So to again do the cruelty of keeping it for yourself. I don't know if I make it clear. I'm trying to speak about specific experiences in a very more generic way, or general way. I'm sorry for not being so specific, but at the same time, I think it's a very important thing to say. The sensual is a collective place. It belongs to society, and it belongs to a group. It belongs to your culture. It belongs to more than yourself. It belongs to the yourself and the more of yourself, your all many selves. So it's a very intriguing experimental place to be. So the freaking out it might be a place where one has fear occurs, or if someone was very shy the whole life, so then it's a very hard place to be when something exposes unshininess, like something extremely explosive, and you cannot even recognize yourself, and it can create some fears. But yet I can believe that apart if you take psychedelic drugs, probably you're not alone. And even though you're not alone. So
Yeah,
we have to share those things. Yeah. Mm.
yeah. The more you sense, the more you are part of the world, and the world itself, and also your inner world. And I am loving, like, yeah, the person that was always shy, and then boom, has an experience of extreme shyness.
And shininess. Yeah.
Shininess can be like, wow, a crisis of identity. I thought I was dot dot dot, and the
Yeah.
identity and your place in the world. But then this opens way for a more genuine way of being as self and as part of the collective. So we have many beings inside. And sometimes I think that I am, well, actually, I am all the plants and vegetables and animals that I have eaten. But sometimes I imagine myself already like a huge plantation of carrots and apple trees and raspberries and the cows that I fed on. And I am all of that. And I am also who I was when I was 5 years old and my past. And perhaps also my many imagined selves. And sensitivity indeed opens ways to experience ourselves more fully and present ourselves more powerfully in the world. And I also believe that it allows for more real listening to the other, and maybe not as much as understanding, try to understand, but at least like respecting the other and the mystery in the other. And I I am loving this like opening to to the mysterious and obscure aspects of being without, well, freaking out completely and also not freaking out. And I feel that there's a kind of relief in being like more porous, like more, like less solid, because pretending to be a certain way with a certain identity and always, I am always shy, it's a huge effort because we cannot be 100% shy all the time, or 100% whatever thing that has to do with fitting in the society. So it's like, yeah, I don't know if I am making any sense, but
Yeah.
I am enjoying
And
it.
also, completely. And again, sensuality, sensuality, sense, there is a word sense in it. So it gives a sense to something as well. So I think to not have, it has a sense. It brings a direction or directions, many ones. So it's not as if you're completely lost. Actually, it gives a
Yeah,
direction more than not having senses, you know.
yeah.
Enfin, not a.
It gives a direction, and I like to have in mind the idea of expectation. For example, what we were talking about, erogenous areas, that when we talk about them per se, then immediately there comes like an expectation of that area bringing a certain satisfaction, which is very transactional, which is like very very commercial, and very interesting to see that sometimes these areas are not included in anatomy books. I have the anatomy book from Andrew Biel, which is a great book, and I have the version that doesn't include the pelvic floor, and the version 4 years after that finally includes the pelvic floor. I think it's the fifth edition. So there's like an expectation that the erogenous zones are going to fulfill a promise of pleasure, and then they are removed from the anatomy books, but at the same time the importance of that area is also removed, because the pelvic floor is not only the place where mating and intercourse and coitus happens, it's also the place where we pee and poo, and we use the pelvic floor to breathe, and it sustains our organs. So trying to solidify our identity, trying to fix things in a box, it's like very very limiting. And yeah I
At the same time, those places never disappeared. They were present, so they speak their lives too. I mean, they were
yeah
not in the book, but they were there. So for sure, they were already expanding their forces for centuries. So in a way, there are many. I would say like the underworld places that are not in the books, but they were live and they were telling us things always.
yeah, always and nonstop. This is very relieving
Mm.
to hear your words that, yeah, they were not in the anatomy books, but they were there doing their
They
thing,
were there, yeah,
really alive,
yeah,
and
and fighting, and they were there, yeah. Mhm.
fighting, doing their thing. So at the end, there's a when narrative and the attempts of societal control meet reality, then they fade down because, like, yeah, you can remove the pelvic floor from the anatomy book, but you cannot remove it from all the humans in the world. And the pelvic floor is still gonna do its thing, and also sensitivity and also pleasure. And yeah, reality goes beyond discourse, and I like it.
Me too.
Yeah. So would you like to share with us a little movement experience or a little song?
Okay, so I can take excerpts from a book that I wrote. I create many different lessons based on different places of anatomy, and actually I make them speak differently. So I have like 30 different lessons on anatomy that is a wrong anatomy, but they are like a scream for the body to us in some ways. And there is one book it has been published a year ago. It's by Varamo Press, and it's a series of gestures. They have a beautiful series on gestures, and they asked me to write something, or to publish something in their in their editions. And I wrote this lesson on gravity, it's called. So it's a small book.
So I can take a screenshot and a lesson on gravity. Love it.
And so I will read just a few pages at the end.
Yes.
It's at the end of the lesson. So the tongue inserts itself inside your mouth. It moves between the front teeth along the dome of your mouth. It crawls on the ceiling of your mouth cavity. It reaches the uvula. The uvula is this little tongue that hangs at the back of your mouth. It entangles itself around your uvula. It spreads saliva over it and falls into the hole at the back of your mouth. It starts crawling inside your throat. The tongue crawls inside your throat. It slides inside the larynx. Yesterday, your throat got longer. Your mouth got smaller, which enabled you to shape sounds and allowed you to speak. And it goes on this way.
You know, I am in awe because I connected with the sensation and the shape of my tongue and it being connected with the front of my neck. And then I felt a sensation like all the way through the system, like from the mouth to the pelvic floor and the stomach. And suddenly I have a very good posture. And I feel very relaxed.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the tongue is a very interesting entity, I will say, because it's not even an organ per se, or it is, but it's not, and it's a muscle at the same time. It gives direction. So I wanted to bring the direction from inside out. So in a way, and also the tongue is related to language. So when actually the language disappears inside in some places, because it reaches the inside the throat, but that it goes in different places in the book. So it's a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all already want your book.
Yeah,
to
I mean,
continue.
I'm just saying because this is a beautiful first it's a beautiful edition, and also Varamo Press, it's a very nice edition, public place, publication place, and I really recommend to buy their books because they are really amazing, very experimental, very beautiful. And there is a tongue in the middle of the book that one can put inside.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So that's yeah, the tongue, your tongue, our tongues are all there.
Beautiful tongue. Yes. So tell us, how can we learn more about your doings, your work?
Well, at the moment, I'm in Rio de Janeiro for a year and a half. I'm doing a research, a postgraduate research here on actually this work on called choreotherapy. So I will probably publish more things after that. There is this book that there it somehow it gives an example of the choreographic lessons that I'm giving. There are performances. I'm also practicing in my one-on-one session in my studio when I was in Vienna, and I will continue my one-on-one session here in Rio de Janeiro. And online, I mean, I publish something called Studies on Fantasmical Anatomy. And
Wow,
yeah, so this is possible to find online. Also, the Varamo Press, they also sell it to have a printed version. That's very nice to have. And inside is very my choreographic, somatic, therapeutic work put into a kind of, let's say, quite poetic version. So, and it was for a PhD that I did when I finished 2 years ago. But it was becoming a kind of embodied PhD, I will say. So this book is quite, this booklet is not so, it's kind of a catalog. It's quite nice to read. So I will say I recommend that. And I perform there and there. I'm practicing in my studio and my place. I invite people to do choreographic session with this idea of expanded sensuality. So that's something that I practice regularly, actually. Mm.
nice. And you do it online as well, or we have to all go to Rio de Janeiro?
I mean, I do when it was COVID, I was doing quite many online sessions. I call them the telepathic session because it was, but it works. I mean, it's really up to the person to decide. Like if they, it's really it's an encounter. I mean, I will not say that I'm a specialist of telepathic session, but I've been practicing a lot of through language and through telepathic gesture that it exists, of course. The hair transform itself and travel around. So why not mind and attention? Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes,
mm,
loving it. Thank you so much. And it's
thank
such a
you.
pleasure to have you here, truly.
Mm. Thank you for the invitation again and have a beautiful time.
Yeah, thank you. And also, thank you, Sensualist, for being here. Go get the studies on phantasmic anatomy from Anne Juren, and also find this book on the tongue from Varamont Press and learn more about her soma choreography therapy work. So very interesting. And also, if you haven't already, go grab the free guide to Awaken Sensuality on my website, which is my name, www.candiaraquel.com, which is www.candiaraquel.com. And see you next time. Until then, remember to take the time to sense your fire so you can share the flame.